Lord. Well, Will, thank you very much indeed for joining me today. I'm really delighted. I'm really looking forward to learning how to interview people better, because I've done a lot of interviews, but I haven't done a fraction of the number of interviews you guys have done. And when I used to be at the hedge funds, I always used to try and write down before I went to see someone what the objectives were for the meeting. Now, usually this would be a meeting to go through my understanding of the company, because I'd done some research and I wanted to meet the management in order to ensure that my understanding was accurate. And so I would be quite clear why I was going in, or I would try to be, obviously not always. But the big trick was, how do you set a relationship? How do you build rapport? How do you get to the starting gate and ensure the guy trusts you? Now, that's very easy if you're in a big hedge fund and he wants your money, he wants a big investment. But what's the trick? How do you guys approach it? I don't know who wants to go first.
I mean, it's one of the most important questions, right? When you approach these things. And I think there are many ways. I think what we do know is how you don't build rapport, right? And from the mistakes that we've made, you know, in terms of making an executive or a CEO, former CEO, current CEO uncomfortable, you know, and that tends to, you know, just from my experience personally, I can speak, is, you know, trying to be too clever and ask the more pointed or controversial question straight up front, and you put the executive in a somewhat uncomfortable, or, you know, or shock them, you know, from the off, and tends to not work out too well for you, and then sets the conversation off from a really bad start. So that's one thing that we tend to always say, is that it's not, you know, when you are interviewing someone, it's not necessarily about the question, it's about the line of questioning. It's about how you sequence your questions into a conversation to make the executive feel comfortable. You know, and it might be as easy as getting them talking about stuff that you know that they know, so they can ease themselves into a conversation, get comfortable. And I think people tend to think that it's maybe wasting a bit of time, but that patience in getting them speaking, getting them comfortable, relaxed, is really important to get to the questions that you really want answering, you know, in the meat of the conversation.
So you would bowl them like an easy ball first, ask them something very simple, or ask them something very open? I mean, what's the trick to get the ball rolling? What would be a good question to ask? So let's just use the example of, we're coming in to meet the CFO of a company we're thinking of investing in. We've done the research, but we've never met him before. So you do your introduction saying, you know, I'm a nice guy, I'm working for a fund that's very long term, we're not going to trade your shares, we'll be knowledgeable, helpful, supportive shareholders. Once you finish that, what do you ask him to get him to respond?
And I think, you know, the way we approach it could be slightly different to how many funds approach it, right? And I think, for example, you know, we interviewed the CEO of Burford Capital, right, listed in here in the UK and also now in the US. You know, and obviously these CEOs and especially obviously of those of publicly listed companies, they get the same old questions each quarter, right? And it's kind of boring, and you know, these guys don't manage their business to quarterly numbers. Well, most of them don't. And so what
doesn't.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so, you know, I mean, if we just take the Burford example, our interview, if you go and read the way we approached it, we wanted to understand the level of integrity of the management, how he thinks about his business, like why this business exists. And we even took a step back to understand his background more specifically. So he was previously a litigator, a lawyer. He then worked in the VC industry. So, you know, we wanted to understand, you know, in terms of the whole interview, the core drivers or the attractiveness of litigation finance as an asset class relative to other alternative assets, right? So, right, PE, VC. And so it just worked out that, you know, Chris Bogart, the guy who runs Burford, he used to work in the VC space. So we actually got him talking about his previous experience, which obviously he can talk about very easily, and then linked it in to actually compare, okay, talk us about running a VC, business. What are the kind of attributes of a VC fund or VC as an asset class? And then go and compare that to litigation finance. And then it's a very comfortable segue for him to start discussing about, litigation, the unit economics of funding a litigation asset relative to funding a startup. But then what's also interesting is you get to understand exactly why this guy is doing this. And it just so happens to work out that, Chris is seems to be a very prudent and somewhat talented capital allocator. And he seems to believe, which would explain by his actions, he left the VC space to move into litigation because he believes that the unit economics are far more favorable than the venture capital. So that's just an example of trying to tie in somewhat easy questions or something that the executive can answer, and then link it into something that you actually want to understand that drives the intrinsic value of a company you're looking at.
So you've almost got a game plan for the interview then.
Oh yeah, I mean,
it's not scripted.
We spend hours on preparing, and this is where it gets interesting because it's, it's a paradox, right? You can script everything you want, but you don't stick to, you almost don't stick to the script, right? You script it and then you chuck it away at the last minute, or you have to be willing to chuck it away, right? Because it's kind of paradoxical, because if I get into the call and, for example, and Chris tells me, actually, that's, it's bullshit, or it doesn't matter. You're on the wrong plane. Like, you've got to be willing to chuck that away and listen to him, and then go where he takes you, whilst also making sure that you're on the right track and not talking complete, rubbish or nothing. Doesn't matter. So it's an art, not a science.
Sure. Well, if there's something I can add to that, it is a cliche and it's tired, but there's that line for interviewing, which is read the book. Right. And so I mean, it's amazing in this business, and in any form of interviewing, just how often people don't read the book, check the background. And I think what Will's illustrated to sort of connect that to a bigger picture, and to connect it to what you were asking around relatability, building trust, building a bond with someone. We all know how information flows between friends. It flows freely. Information wants to flow. And we often think about how to remove barriers to the free flow of information, to natural flows. And one thing you can do is really deeply understand, beyond just the immediate role that the executive's in, where they're from, where they grew up. You can get into so much detail, more detail with some than others, but just finding some point to relate to, where you can build, you can actually show people that you care. Show people that you've actually prepared, show them some respect, which is really so, I think, time and time again, that's proof for us to be a really fruitful way to open in building trust.
Well, and just making it more specific to actually, interviewing executives and spending just as much time understanding the person you're interviewing as well as the company in a way is crucial, right? Because we all spend time researching the business, but actually going to spend an hour, 2 hours, understanding when the person you're interviewing, where they worked and what stage was that business at when they were working there, what were they specifically doing, who did they report to, where did that guy go, where did the she go? Like, understanding that whole ecosystem is crucial to understanding, well, just helpful to frame in the conversation, right? and understand where to focus on in that interview.
Of course, looking at the CV is very helpful, but not all people give you all their CV. So you might get, where they've been to university. You might not know where they're born or where they were brought up. You'd usually know their education, wouldn't you? And you'd usually know their past companies. And
that's enough, right? I mean, I think that you don't need to know where they're born necessarily, but the previous employment. We're talking about interviewing executives from an investment standpoint here, right? Understanding, who the person worked with, who they reported to, and at which company, and more importantly, what stage of the company, they were working at, and kind of, because that helps inform the decisions they made, right? To why they're working where they are now and stuff like that, which is crucial to helping frame the conversation.
No, absolutely. So we've done the opening set of questions. We've got a really relaxed, comfortable CFO who's prepared to talk to us. And we've built up trust. He knows that we understand him and understand the company. You'll have what, 3 or 4 questions you want answered? I mean, will you have a script and an idea of the time you want to spend in each area? Obviously, it depends on the answers as to how you stick to that, but just run me through what comes next.
I mean, for every company you ever look at, there's only a few questions that really matter typically, you know, for driving the underlying value of the business. So typically, you know, we will have a specific line of questioning that we would look to follow, call it a script, but you know, a line of questioning that would, again, get the executive comfortable and then lead to the specific output or potential answers to the questions that we think matter for the company. But what we do try to do is make sure that, you know, you get the executive explaining from a first principles approach, right? Rather than just jumping about, you know, I don't know, if we're looking at the gross margin or you know, whatever operating leverage of a business, don't just go and straight and ask them like how he sees up, you know, EBIT margin or gross margin changing. You know, walk through how he sources inventory or how it turns or when it, you know, stuff like that. So you can actually reason from first principles, and then you get to the actual answer, which is how do you see them gross margin change in the next 5 years or whatever, right? So it's that line of questioning and the sequencing that helps, you know, paint a narrative, but from first principles that really helps refine your understanding of the business.
I mean, what I used to do sometimes, particularly if it was a manufactured product, would be to say, can you just walk me through one sale? So you're making a widget. Can you just run me through what are the steps to make the widget and then to sell the widget? And I often found that was actually quite revealing as to, you know, they would spend a lot of time on something that I hadn't previously considered, or not even considered important, I hadn't even considered, because they would say, oh, and of course, you know, so I'm trying to think of an example. When you start talking to the chief executive of Vestas about the sale of a wind turbine, the first thing he would say is, well, of course, the really difficult thing is how you deliver it. And well, what do you mean? And he said, oh, well, you know, we had one last week where we hadn't realized that the truck was, you know, it was very long and the truck was very big and it was up in the mountains. Often these things are up in the mountains. And we ended up having to buy this farmhouse and knock it down so we could get the truck around the corner because it was on. And then you know, oh, okay. And that led to, okay, so now I'm beginning to understand what the logistics are in your business and what the constraints are in your business. And actually it's much more complicated than fabricating a piece of steel and sticking some concrete down. And I mean, is that a good?
I think typically always looking at a unit helps in informing the, you know, I guess your understanding. I think where you know, what we also try and focus on is, for example, if you look at some of the stuff we've recently done on Wayfair, right, and the online furniture retailer that also effectively is building their own supply chain, right, end-to-end supply chain. You know, the benefit that we have that, you know, typically other stuff that we see in the industry is that we don't, because we do this for a living, right? We do all these calls all the time. We can really get honed in on the specific parts. So we'd even break up how the unit flows in the supply chain, right? So we've done a call specifically on the first mile of the supply chain. So everything from sourcing the widget from the supplier in Vietnam or Asia, and then putting that on a container, shipping it via ocean, and then getting it up to the warehouse and stopping there on the call, you know, which is like, no one would really think of doing that, right? So, but we can get really granular and understanding the potential advantages that Wayfair might have for example, today when there might be constrained with capacity. So, we tend to focus on, so if you look at some of the stuff we have on InPractise, it would probably look to be quite focused. But when you bring these together, it gets a nice holistic picture of how a unit does flow from many different calls. And I think the big trick that the big challenge that we find is that, translating the language of the executive into financial statements or from an investment standpoint, because most executives don't think about the income statement or the free cash flow of the business. They're just looking at buying a container for as cheap as possible and how that translates, not necessarily how that translates into the unit economics. So translating that into what drives the business and from an investment standpoint is kind of the trick.
Of course, I mean, of course, it depends who you're speaking to, and I guess typically you would be speaking to non-financial.
Yeah, for example, our supply chain executive, or we interviewed someone who was running the first mile at Wayfair, and he doesn't necessarily look at Wayfair's free cash flow and or cash flow statement, right? So, but translating why, if Wayfair can fix container prices at $5,000, for a 20-foot container versus a spot price of 20,000, like how does that translate into gross margin improvement, right? Otherwise, why are we doing this? It doesn't matter, So that's kind of the challenge of doing these primary research calls, is translating that into understanding why it matters.
No, I absolutely get that. But just on this question of the plan and the map for the interview, so perhaps you might have the luxury of having more time because the person's committed to doing an interview and he knows that you need a certain amount of information. Typically, the situations I would be faced with would be, I'm at the UBS US conference and I've got an hour. And if I'm really lucky, I've got an hour on my own. Sometimes you don't even have the hour on your own. But let's just say we've got a one-to-one and we've done our homework and we've picked the right company. I did actually manage at one conference to go into the company meeting thinking it was the company that made widgets, and it was actually a company that made contact lenses, had the same name. I just didn't know. I didn't know what to do. I felt like saying, I was like 5 minutes in, because I'd spent all this time telling them how nice I was and what a good company I worked for and how we would be very helpful shareholders, and I'd studied their business and I was really interested in it, and then they'd sort of done all this very generic comment, and then they said, yeah, but of course the lens market is, and I'm like, what? And I thought, oh, terrible. I mean, so assume that you've done more preparation than I've done. It only happened to me once out of hundreds of interviews, so it's not that bad. I mean, you're bound to get one mistake, but you've got restricted time, and we go off tangent, we go down this rabbit hole. How do you know whether to follow that? Because the executives, obviously, this is a sensitive area for them. How do you know whether you should stick to your script or veer off? And how do you work out, how do you calibrate, oh, I've only got 30 minutes left. Have I got enough time to fit everything that I need to do in?
This is a great question. And this is part of the challenges of doing these calls, because part of what when we go into the interviews, we
do you do them together, or is it just one of you usually?
Yeah, we do mainly one each. One of us does the interviews. So when we do go in, we're implicitly making a judgment about what matters, and so part of the challenge that you have is that when you're asking certain questions, even if you're not framing the questions, which we typically do all the time, we're always biased and frame them a certain way. Even when you're asking a question about a certain thing, you're making a judgment that matters. So part of the challenge is, if the executive does venture away from what you're discussing, that's when you have to make the judgment whether are they doing that to deflect answering a question, or just ranting and rambling, because people do, right, when they're in conversation, or is the executive telling me what really matters and what actually is driving the business? And that's where it's tricky to kind of make a judgment about, do I go with the executive to down this rabbit hole, or actually are they deflecting some question? Are they avoiding a question? Are they rambling? And do I need to put them on track to what really matters? And it comes from doing the research. It comes from understanding, the context, and it's an art, right? It's an art, not a science.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is why we're having the conversation. Well, I mean, do you have any tricks in this? How do you tell if somebody's genuinely interested in this other thing, or if he's dissembling, doesn't want to answer your question?
Taking a quick step back to observing the actual dynamic at play, taking us into this conference situation. You've got a short amount of time. You've got and I think the point I'd invite is to really work and invest as much time as you can within constraints and actually understanding the state of mind of the person that you're speaking to. Understanding, so really, yeah, I mean, in terms of understanding their state of mind, I think there's a couple levels to it, right? There's just getting into their shoes in terms of the kinds of questions that are being fired at them by the group of analysts that they're meeting, right? And being sensitive to that. Thinking about, I think what we see so often is people coming in with lists, with an agenda, firing stuff off, and actually kind of leaving the room feeling quite dissatisfied, right? That's a really common experience. And so what I'd say is, in investing that time early on and getting a sense for, is this, is the executive having a good or a shitty day? Is he frustrated? Is he just come out of an awful meeting? These things that can, where you might feel like you're wasting a bit of time, can actually give you those signals to get a sense for where you might actually do really well to drive the conversation where it might be incremental to you.
So our interviewee has had a really crap day. He's the CFO, and he's gone, and the CEO has chewed him out about something, and you're the next meeting, so he's in a bad mood. How do you get him back on an even keel? What are there any tricks that you can use? You take chocolate, or you laugh. I'll tell you what, taking a present in.
I mean, I laugh because it works, right? I think it's these kind of things that they sound gimmicky. They can be pretty effective. I think actually showing genuine interest in them as a human being. And that's to say that practically, before you dive into your questions, and if you sense that someone's just had a shitty meeting or whatever, maybe be it the context that you've just described specifically, investing a few more minutes in how they're doing and why they care about the business that they're in. I remember talking to Will about a recent interview that he did with another Wayfair executive who ran their supply chain operations, where in advance of the call, Will actually invited him to speak about the earliest stages of his career in supply chain. And that got him comfortable, got him excited. You're reminiscing. That is one specific example, but there's so many ways to actually, frankly, to put it crudely, just show that you actually give a shit about who they are, why they're doing their work. And it's paradoxical. You might feel that, you've got an hour, and it's so typical for people who want to cram so much in, when in fact, if you just take that 10, even up to 10, 15 minutes, the value you can get out of the remaining amount of time, if you've reduced the friction, if you've built that trust, you can get hours of information in 15 minutes once you've established trust.
But then you have to be really focused and rigorous about making a segue to actually what matters and bringing it to the present, right? And I think no matter who you speak to, formers, current CFO, CEOs, like they'll always deflect some part of the question or not answer the question completely. And I think part of the art of conversation, especially in this type of work, is getting good at asking the same question 10 times in different ways. And so, you know, you can use all different types of techniques in setting building a narrative or setting context that would be able to, you know, share some insight into the kind of question that you're really looking to answer, even if the executive cannot tell you specifically what you'd like to know, and he might be able to provide a framework of how to approach the question and find an answer. But that's kind of, again, that's part of the fun, right?
And if I can add to that, I mean, you'll even have noticed in the contrast between Will and I, you might guess that we actually have quite different interview styles.
No.
And there'll be certain kinds of interviews that Will is far more effective in driving for outcomes on, and there'll be certain kinds of people that he might resonate with more, and vice versa for myself. So, you know, just to throw in that dimension of self-understanding, in addition to paying attention to who you're working with, is what kinds of questions am I really well equipped to drive for an incremental outcome on? And are there topics that are best left to actually put to a different kind of executive? Where else could I find this information? But that I tend to place a lot of emphasis on the interpersonal dynamic and invest quite a bit in that to create a container for that information to flow. Will spends a lot of time on that as well. The kinds of topics that he gets into typically tend to be much more technical than I might get into. So
I mean, you don't know beforehand what sort of person it's going to be, so you kind of,
unless you do the work, right? I mean, you'd
decide who does what.
But you'd be surprised at how you can frame someone's personality from the decisions they've made in their career and who they've worked with and what stage of the company they've worked at. You know, and not that you can understand their personality specifically, but you can understand potentially the types of worldviews they've had. And obviously we have the advantage of speaking to the executive for 45 minutes before we do interview them, right? So that's why, you know, we have so much fun, because we can really prepare for the final output that you read. Whereas, like you said, if you're working at a fund, you typically get chucked on the phone call and you know, you're there for an hour. So yeah, we have the slight advantage of you know,
I think if I were to add something that operates across our styles, is this idea of resonance. You know, when you feel it when you're with someone, the more resonance you build, you could use it as a proxy for trust, or maybe the word is actually interchangeable with trust. But that resonance comes from a genuine interest in someone's background. The more you can collect stories, anecdotes, the more you can think about and maybe take guesses on career choices that they made from their CV, and test those ideas out. And again, it's very hard. I mean, probably best explored through specific cases. But this idea of, I think psychologically, people feel more comfortable the more resonance there is in the interpersonal dynamic. Meaning, can I actually, when I think about the person that I'm working with, how do I align with, and we'll use the word worldview? Is this a glass half full person or a glass half empty person? Is there anything I can pick up that might suggest one or the other? How does this person see the world? And can I actually mirror that? And not so much in a sort of, you know, because people feel when you're being sneaky or you're being, you know, obsequious. I'm not at all suggesting that. I'm suggesting find the part of yourself, because there's many parts to us, that does resonate with that worldview, that can identify with that way of looking at things. And that mirroring tends to open up the playing field, give you a bit more room. And what I think, I mean, I'll speak for myself, but I think probably resonate for Will, is when you find that you create that space in the resonance, people actually will tend to volunteer information that you're looking for.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's no question. If you build up rapport, the whole thing's a lot easier. I must say, I'm very relieved that you said that about asking about people's early careers, because, you know, I've got a podcast, and I generally start the podcast by asking them about, how did you get into this field? And I think it is very, I don't ask me why I chose that. I was trying to think of a standard opening line, but it is actually very good because people then feel quite comfortable because they're talking about something that they know, and oh yeah, of course I got into it. And the really interesting thing about fund management is very few people set out to be fund managers. There's the odd person that loved gambling and going in the stock market was the next best thing, but most of the people I've interviewed who have been, extraordinarily successful. John Armitage, it's a complete fluke. Guy's one of the best investors in the world, but never.
I think what's also interesting about that point is just, especially when you're doing primary research, is that we need to handicap all the information we receive, right, from these interviews. Like, it's not gospel, right? And so understanding the worldview of the person you're speaking to, understanding where they come from, what might be their biases, like how might they be forming their judgment, that's crucial for us to form our judgment, right? And we might come out of it and be like, actually, that's kind of bullshit because they're seeing the world in a certain way that may not be true. Or we might be like, actually, they've given us a completely different perspective that we've been missing. So I think the point is not just the fact that you're getting them comfortable, it's also you understand the person you're speaking to, because that's how you handicap the information, right?
Absolutely. One thing you just said, Will, a minute ago was you need to get good at asking the same question 10 different ways. Now, this interests me because generally speaking, the people that I was having a meeting with would be, a FTSE 100, an S&P 500, Fortune 500, CEO, CFO. They haven't got there by accident, right? They've got there in an intensely competitive field. They're very political. They're generally, especially if they're American, especially good at sales. And they are, if they don't want to answer the question, it's really can be really difficult to get.
How good are you though?
Well, obvious. I don't claim any particular expertise, but once you've asked the question, they know what question you're asking. So once you've asked it one way, once you asked it a second way, how many times can you ask, what is the return on capital in this division going to be? You can frame it in all sorts of different ways, but how do you, how many times will you ask that? And,
for a whole hour.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, of course. But again, it's not, it's not asking what's the return on invested capital of a division necessarily, right? Like it's again, it's going back and reframing and re-architecting a line of questioning that would get you the ingredients to make your own judgment.
Yeah, well, typically what I would do in that situation, I might ask, because I didn't think there was any sensitivity about it, is, what's your target for returning capital in that division? And then if they said, if their reaction was sensitive, so this is something I don't want to talk about, I would then sort of say, your competitor has been talking about market growth of X. What do you think about that? And then I would go on to the input costs, and then I would go on to the, well, it seems weird because there's, you wouldn't have expected that these assets were employed in this division. Do you need that factory, and so I would kind of triangulate between the revenues, the costs, and the assets, or maybe the working capital. But that's quite labor intensive or time intensive in an interview situation. But it's also, given that you've asked the question up front and he or she knows what you're asking about, and they're sensitive, they tend to be quite good at ducking the answer, not giving you the information you want. Sometimes you can get there, but are there any tips that you've got for how do you circle around them so they've got that they feel awkward about not answering? That's really what the key is, isn't it?
Well, and like I said, I think we would class that as I guess you kind of know what's sensitive or what they're kind of going to deflect, right? Like you know if especially if you're talking to a current CEO of a public company, you know that if you're asking, you know, the incremental return on capital or the return on capital for a certain division that's not disclosed, you know, it's borderline MMPI and they're not going to answer it anyway, right? And so I think it's about, and again, I think we as investors, we want the executives to lay out the unit economics of each division on an Excel file for us, right? That's kind of what we're looking for. And it doesn't work like that, and they're never going to do that. So I think it's trying to pass together pieces of information that could inform our judgment to a certain confidence level that we can make up our own mind. You know, so I think we focus less on actually, you know, getting some kind of numbers from the CEOs about undisclosed, you know, segments or stuff, and more about, yeah, how the business operates and trying to inform a judgment about what the unit economics could look like for ourselves. It's difficult. It's really tricky.
And just on the sort of practical side, so we're conducting this interview on Zoom. Zoom is a very difficult medium, I find. So I've got a business training investors, and if I do an in-person course, it's much more enjoyable than doing a Zoom course, because you can see the people, you can see their body language, but you can't see my hands. And you don't have any idea what the other person's feeling. So have you got any tips for doing interviews on Zoom?
I think video is so much better than audio, though. Although you might not be next to the person and you can see their body language, I think you can tell a lot around tone and just visually, like the way they're standing or sitting. You can tell a lot about the body language and what might be uncomfortable. And I think that's where, you know, especially everything we do is typically over video. Every interview we do internally is over video. So we get a sense for that start 10 minutes, you can get them really comfortable or try and get them comfortable. And if they're not comfortable, that's when it's tricky to kind of navigate to what matters. So I think you can find a lot over body language, but there's no replacement for in person, right?
No. So how do you know if somebody's comfortable or uncomfortable on Zoom?
You can tell by the way they're sitting, you know, if they're
I'm not sitting.
Rigid, yeah, or standing, exactly, right? Or standing or sitting. They're, you know, you can tell if their body is kind of, you know, more rigid than normal. And just the way they speak as well, right? I mean, I had an interview the other day where I feel like executives sometimes, they always feel like they need to opine on everything, you know, and they always feel like they need to have an answer for everything you may ask, right? So when someone tends to ramble or go above and beyond in an answer that's just not required, it may mean they're kind of uncomfortable and not fully relaxed. So it's always a mix between the tone, the body language, the answers they provide, and yeah, I guess just making many mistakes. You get a sense of this, right? Intuitively.
Yeah. I would say what can help over Zoom, I mean, it's really stuff as simple as just tension in the face, tension in the shoulders, having a big screen on your end so that whoever you're speaking to is, you know, 24, 26, 30-inch monitor, so that you can see nuance, muscular nuance. Which again, you know, you may or may not do anything for you, but just your chances of actually spotting, you know, how someone's feeling physically are increased by bigger screens.
Okay, I mean, it so happens I've got quite a big screen, but that wasn't why. I don't. And I'm not even sure that I prefer the bigger screen. I find that it's a long way over there to my other screen, but now I've got a standing desk. So what I do is I do one screen and I've got the other one there for reference, and I can walk over to the other screen if need be. I don't know. I think though I should have got one of those big curved screens. But what do you do? Do you record the interviews? Do you use manual notes, or do you use a laptop? I mean, I see people typing notes in meetings, and I thought that's really. I mean, I'm just not a very good typist, so it would be awful. You know, I wouldn't. At least I can read my writing. How do you do it? Any tips?
Yeah, well, I feel like writing during the interview is just a recipe for not listening. You know, I struggle to listen if I'm doing something else. So I try and give myself the best chance to actively listen to the person, because half the time it's so easy not to listen. I'm just thinking about what I want to say next, and that's not helpful for the conversation. So yeah, I don't write anything during the interview. And
But you're recording.
yeah, exactly. Obviously everything's recorded that we do. So which is obviously part of the reason. If I wasn't recording it, then I would probably have to make notes to some extent.
And do you do the same, Will? Do you record and what do you do? You write up the notes after?
Yeah, it'll be the same. I find, I mean, we're in this very lucky situation where everything that we do for InPractise is on record. When I am speaking to someone in a pre-call, I will be taking notes, and Will and I have wrestled with this for close to 8-9 years now, is the relationship between note-taking, your ability to listen, finding, training your shorthand, training yourself to capture the essence in as few pen strokes as possible. Because when I'm looking down and typing or writing, I'm not looking at you. I'm not looking at whether you're tense or not, or whether you're enjoying yourself or not. I'm not picking up on cues that might, if you give me an opening to a question that you might be willing to answer no and not in a few minutes. So it's really hard. It's one of the hardest things.
So that's a useful tip that people should take away, is don't take notes as you go, and take the notes afterwards. And one of the things that
which, by the way, really briefly on that, practicing recall, I find that you can actually, the more you practice actively recalling and sitting down somewhere quiet after a meeting, that can be trained. And thus reducing the reliance on note-taking during the session.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting old, so my memory is not what it once was. But I did a podcast yesterday, and it was with 2 people. And we finished the podcast, and then the conversation got really interesting. So I said to the sound engineer, get the microphones back, get the microphones back. And of course, I was having a conversation. I didn't feel I could take notes. And so I then got in a cab with one of them to go back to my office and drop him off. And of course, I got back to the office, and I was rushed to my office to write things down. And somebody stopped me and said, "Oh, Steve," and I ended up having a drink with this person because it's Thursday, and we have drinks on a Thursday evening, and you're then struggling to remember everything. So that's, for me, I just find it's much easier to take notes as I go. And if then I know that I'm not going to miss any of the key points. And sometimes it's just like one really small nugget that leads you to something else. And what I find is, by taking notes as I go, that cues me into the next question, because I know what I want to ask. So I don't know. I mean, that's just been the habit that I've developed over the years. Not because, when I've been doing meetings, you didn't have the opportunity to record them, right? So
it's something I struggle with personally a lot. And I just know in my own experience that I haven't cracked the note-taking element of it by any stretch.
Listen, it's been fascinating. I could do this for a long time, but it's been really, really interesting. Just to finish off, I mean, are there any sort of articles or books you can recommend? I'll link to your guidelines, obviously, that you gave me. But anything else that people should read or to improve their interviewing skills?
I think you just got to do them. You just got to do hundreds of them and make the mistakes.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's always the best practice. So before we go, tell the audience, where can people find you? What I was just about to do what you shouldn't do, which is ask a 2-part question, but I can ask the 2-part question because you will answer both parts. What's InPractise, and why should people subscribe?
So we're a kind of an online primary research service. So we publish hundreds of hours of executive interviews for professional investors. You can subscribe online, InPractise.com. And yeah, and if you're interested in learning about high quality businesses via conversations with experienced operators, then, you know, come to InPractise. And this is just the start of what we're up to, right? So we have, right now, we produce mainly executive interviews, but we're also branching out into doing various different types of content. So we do investor dialogues now, which is 4 to 5 professional investors, typically current or prospective or previous shareholders of a company, and we discuss that with the shareholders. We publish that also, and we do a weekly analysis of everything we've learned during the week that gets sent to your inbox and also available on the app. So we're kind of bringing together, you know, a kind of investment research service from various different angles, build off primary research. And in the long run, you know, hopefully we can evolve into something that includes investors learning from each other as well as from executives.
Brilliant. Well, thank you both so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.
Great
Steve.
pleasure.
Cheers.